Have you ever noticed how some people just don't need validation? They do their work, handle their responsibilities, go through life quietly, and when something good happens, they don't rush to announce it. No dramatic posts, no need for applause, just a small nod, maybe a quiet, "that went well," and then they move on. If you ask them how they learned to be that way, the answer is often surprisingly simple. No one really clapped when I was growing up. Now, at first, that might sound a little sad, like something was missing, like encouragement or praise should have been there but wasn't. But here's the interesting part. For a large group of people, often referred to as Generation X, this wasn't unusual at all. In fact, it was normal. They grew up in a time where independence wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. And that environment shaped the way their minds work in ways that are still visible today. Let me take you back for a moment. Imagine being a kid coming home from school. You open the door, the house is quiet. Maybe both parents are working. Maybe no one is there to ask how your day went. No one checking your homework right away. No one monitoring every move. So you figure things out yourself. You make your own snack. You finish your homework. You solve small problems on your own. At first, it's just a routine. But over time, your brain starts adapting to this pattern. It learns something very important. I am responsible for myself. This kind of environment creates what psychologists often describe as self-reliance, not the loud, confident kind you see in movies, but a quiet, steady kind, the kind that doesn't need constant reassurance. Now compare that to a different scenario. A child completes a task and immediately looks around for approval. Did I do it right? Is this good enough? Are you proud of me? There's nothing wrong with that. It's human. But for many Gen X individuals, that loop of constant external validation simply didn't exist in the same way. So their brains developed differently. Instead of asking, "What do others think of this?" they often learn to ask, "Does this make sense to me?" It's a subtle shift, but it changes everything. Because when your internal voice becomes the main source of feedback, your relationship with success, failure, and even identity starts to look very different. Let's talk about something fascinating. Psychologists often explore the idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is when you do something for external rewards, praise, recognition, approval. Intrinsic motivation is when you do something because it feels right to you, because it's interesting, because it aligns with your values. Now, here's where it gets interesting. People who grow up without constant praise often develop stronger intrinsic motivation, not because they're trying to be different, but because their environment naturally pushed them in that direction. They didn't get applause for every small achievement, so their brain stopped expecting it, and instead it learned to find satisfaction internally. Think about that for a second. Imagine finishing something important, and instead of waiting for someone to notice, you simply sit back and feel a quiet sense of completion. No noise, no performance, just a calm internal signal that says, "That was enough." That's a very different psychological experience, but it comes with both strengths and challenges. On one hand, this independence can be incredibly powerful. Gen X individuals often handle uncertainty better. They're used to figuring things out without a detailed roadmap. They don't panic as easily when things go wrong because deep down, they trust their ability to adapt. It's like growing up without GPS. You learn how to read the map. You get lost sometimes, but eventually you develop a strong sense of direction. On the other hand, there's a quieter side that people don't always talk about. When you grow up without consistent emotional validation, you might also become less comfortable asking for help. Not because you don't need it, but because your brain learned early on that help isn't always available. So instead of reaching out, you figure it out alone, even when things get heavy, even when it would be easier to share the load. There's also something else that happens. If you weren't praised often, you might not fully recognize your own achievements. You accomplish something meaningful, but instead of celebrating, you move on to the next task, almost like your brain skips the reward phase entirely. This can create a strange dynamic where you're highly capable, but quietly hard on yourself, always improving, always moving forward, but rarely pausing to acknowledge how far you've come. Now, here's where the psychology gets even deeper.
When people grow up in environments where emotional expression isn't strongly encouraged, they often become very good at regulating themselves. They don't overreact easily. They stay composed. They handle stress internally. From the outside, this can look like emotional strength, and in many ways it is. But internally, it can also mean that emotions don't always get processed fully. They get managed, contained, stored. It's like having a room where you place things neatly instead of throwing them away. Everything looks organized, but over time the room gets full, and occasionally something small can trigger a bigger emotional response than expected. Not because the situation is huge, but because it connected to something that's been sitting quietly in that room for a long time. This doesn't mean something is wrong. It simply means the mind adapted to a certain environment, and every adaptation comes with trade-offs. Now, let's talk about relationships. People who grow up without constant praise often value authenticity over performance. They're not as interested in surface-level interactions. They don't feel the need to impress constantly. In fact, they might find overly performative behavior exhausting. They prefer real conversations, honest moments, people who show up without masks. But at the same time, expressing vulnerability might not come naturally. Saying, "I need help," or "I'm struggling," can feel unfamiliar, almost like speaking a language they understand but rarely use. So instead, they show care in quieter ways. They fix problems. They show up when it matters. They stay consistent, not always expressive, but deeply reliable. And when you've ever known someone like this, you've probably felt it. They might not say much, but when they're really there. Now, here's something important to understand. The phrase "raised without applause" doesn't mean raised without love. Love was often there. It just looked different. Less verbal, less expressive, more practical. It showed up in actions rather than words, making sure things were handled, providing stability, teaching independence. And that kind of love leaves a unique psychological imprint. It teaches you that care doesn't always need to be announced, that strength doesn't always need to be visible, that you can stand on your own even when no one's watching. But as the world changes, something interesting happens. Modern culture places a lot of emphasis on visibility, sharing, expressing, celebrating every step. And for someone who grew up without that framework, it can feel slightly out of sync, like everyone else is playing a different game. Not wrong, just different. And this is where awareness becomes powerful. Because once you understand how your environment shaped your mind, you can start choosing what to keep and what to adjust. You can keep the independence, keep the resilience, keep the ability to think for yourself. But you can also learn to acknowledge your own achievements, to allow yourself moments of recognition, to share your thoughts and emotions more openly when it matters. Not because you suddenly need applause, but because connection sometimes grows through expression. And here's the beautiful part. You don't have to change who you are. You're simply expanding your range, adding new tools to a mind that already knows how to stand strong on its own. So, if you've ever felt like you don't need constant validation, like you quietly handle things on your own, like you move through life without needing applause, there's a good chance your mind was shaped by experiences that taught you self-reliance early on. And that's not something to see as a lack. It's a different kind of strength, a quiet one, the kind that doesn't always show up in obvious ways, but becomes incredibly powerful over time. I'm curious about something. Do you find yourself doing things without needing recognition? Or do you sometimes wish you had a bit more encouragement growing up? Let me know in the comments. It's always interesting to see how different experiences shape different minds. And if you enjoy exploring the deeper psychology behind personality and behavior, stay with me. Because the more you understand how your mind was shaped, the more control you have over where it goes next.